Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. This book is for anybody that wants to be able to tap into something called flow state. It's a state of mind that most of us have experienced and are very familiar with. It's a state of mind where you are very focused but yet very calm. And whatever it is you're doing it really well. And you tap into higher faculties of the mind. You tap into understandings and information that kind of surprise you, abilities that surprise you. You didn't realize you had it in you, and you perform really well. The situation, whatever it is you're doing, is challenging, but it's not overwhelming. And as a result of that, you're able to come up with solutions. You're able to solve problems. You're able to continue doing what you're doing real time, and you're enjoying it. You're having a lot of fun. You're feeling happiness. It doesn't seem stressful, and nothing else seems to matter outside of that thing that you're doing. Now, you can experience flow state when you're socializing, when you are involved with certain things in maybe your business, when you're exercising, playing sports, extreme sports, just even doing day-to-day things, you can experience flow. Playing certain games, video games, doing your morning routine, washing the dishes even, you can experience flow. And it is in those moments where you really recognize and appreciate happiness. That's because it's in those moments that you experience true happiness. It's where you feel you are contributing, you're doing something purposeful and productive, yet you are enjoying what you're doing. It's like a perfect balance. Now, think about situations in your life where you've experienced flow. And understand something, that you can increase the amount of flow experiences that you have day to day. And you could do it with more intensity, and you could do it formulaically. That's even a word. You could do it in a way where you can command flow. And the cool thing about this is you can now experience flow in things that you never thought you could experience flow in before. You could experience flow doing certain things in your business, for example, that you never wanted to do. Maybe it's administration. Maybe it's responding to emails. You can actually experience flow while you're doing those things. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. First, we're going to talk about high-level concepts based on quotes that I pulled from the book, and then we're going to get into the process for creating flow. So after watching this video, you're going to have a very good understanding of how to recreate flow in different situations in your life. Like I said, maybe situations you never thought you could create flow in. And you're going to find true happiness, real happiness. So this book is intended to explore the very ancient question: when do people feel most happy? You see, happiness is not something that happens. It is not the result of good fortune or random chance. It is not something that money can buy or power command. And it does not depend on outside events, contrary to the belief, but rather how we interpret them. You see, nothing in your life has meaning unless you give it meaning. And for most of us, when we grow up, we're taught by people and situations, school, etc., what the meaning should be. And we fail to recognize, because we just don't understand how it works, that when people are telling us that this is the meaning, that we're actually accepting it as the meaning without actually really questioning it. But that's okay, because that's how it is in earlier stages of life. Later on, you discover that, hey, you know what? I can give it my own meaning. For example, rejection. If I'm reaching out to someone in the business world and they don't want to do business with me, rather than feeling upset about it, I could recreate the story and say, I actually feel good about this because now I know a person that's not interested in what I have to offer, and I could either A, figure out how to get them interested by looking at my process, or I can go out and communicate with another person. Maybe they would be interested in what I have to offer. See, that's a lot more empowering than saying, oh, this person didn't want to buy my stuff, and therefore I'm not good enough, or anything like that. Now, most people in this world see themselves as the effect rather than the cause. And on this channel, I try to help you become the cause rather than the effect. Now, this is something that is a lifelong journey. It takes a long time to get to higher levels and higher levels. But it's very powerful to be seeing yourself as the cause rather than the effect, because pretty much every area of your life that you want results in is going to be an area that you're going to take responsibility for. You see, no one's going to give anything to you. No one's going to hand things to you. In this world, value is exchanged for value. And if you can't even see the correlation, it doesn't really matter. But you have to first accept that that's what it is. And then you'll start to see the correlation. You'll know that when you give a certain amount of value, you get X amount of value in return. But you have to first start with the understanding that you have to create first before you get anything in return. And that means taking responsibility. And this means not just at a high level of like, I'm going to create value and make millions of dollars, but even at a micro level of, if people aren't being nice to you and they aren't smiling at you and they aren't being polite with you, you be polite anyways. Knowing that that's who you are because you're a value creator. And you don't let the outside world or circumstances dictate how you behave and how you respond. You're constantly focused on creating value in many shapes and forms. When you do this, you will realize that you control your life. And then you'll have a greater ability to rewrite stories real time. And this is one of the important components of experiencing flow. Experiencing flow consciously, not just automatically, because, like I said, we've probably experienced it in many areas of our life, playing sports and so forth, socializing. Being able to do it consciously means that you take responsibility for the components that I'm going to talk about later in this video, and you make sure that you stay on course so that you can find yourself in that flow feeling. You can find yourself in that flow variation, or whatever you want to call it, that flow. You can find yourself there because you take responsibility of ensuring that nothing outside of you is impacting you from either getting into flow or maintaining it. It's a conscious effort. And it is in flow where you feel happy. Why? Because flow is not only a highly productive state, but it's one where you're highly engaged and you tend to forget about useless things that otherwise clutter your mind. Flow will examine the process of achieving happiness through control over one's inner life. Everything we experience, joy or pain, interest or boredom, is represented in the mind as information. If we're able to control this information, we can decide what our lives will be like. Again, we don't have to accept information the way it's presented to us or based on the story that somebody else says you should internalize the information. You have a choice on how you can accept that information. You can accept it in an empowering way or a negative way, a disempowering way. This doesn't mean that you're delusional. That's not what this means. Or you're blind. What this means is that you know exactly what it is that you want to achieve in your life and recognize that you're going to have to be the one who takes responsibility to get that, because most likely nobody's going to give it to you. And the more you assume responsibility, the less you're going to rely on people. You are going to become interdependent rather than being dependent. Okay? There's independent, dependent, and interdependent. Most people think that by being independent that they're being optimal. That's not actually true. Interdependent is where it's at. And the reason why is because no matter what you do in this world, in this society, modern society, you're going to have to, in some shape or form, deal with people. Even if you have your own business, for example, and you have no staff and you have nobody helping you, really, you still have your clients. You still have people that are buying your products or services. So you're still interdependent. However, the key is to be the one that takes responsibility and understands that if a relationship or if anything does not go your way, that you could have done something about it, that you can do something about it going forth. It's okay to make mistakes. It's important to learn from your mistakes. And one of the best ways to learn from your mistakes is to not blame others for your mistake in any shape or form, to recognize that they are your mistakes, that you don't beat yourself up for it, but at the same time, you are being very granular as to what the optimizations and the improvements are so you can get to a higher level. When a person is able to organize his or her consciousness so as to experience flow as often as possible, the quality of life is inevitably going to improve because, as in the case of Rico and Pam, this is stories from the book, even the usually boring routines of work can become purposeful and enjoyable. So we have to learn how to find happiness in everything that we do. Because we never know. We could find ourselves in situations where a lot of what we have taken for granted right now in our life that exists right now is taken away in some shape or form. And then we're going to have to be forced to find happiness in those situations. Otherwise, we'll lose our mind. We will lose our presence of mind, and we might end up going on a downhill spiral. Okay, what happens in life is that some people, they get a high level of success, they get high level results, and their whole identity is built around external stimulus. All their fans or all the material possessions that they have or what people say about them, all the validation they get. And the moment they lose that, they're devastated. And they go on this downward spiral. They might result to drugs and alcohol and excessive indulging in pleasure just to be able to not face the truth that identity that they built was just based on a facade. Okay, so we don't want to become like that. We don't want to set ourselves up for that. We want to be the kind of people that values everything we have right now. And while we get success and while we get results, we value that also. But if it was taken away from us, we would be okay. Because our real source of happiness comes from the meaning of doing things, and we can enjoy doing everything, including recreating stuff over again, even if it means we have to do the lower level tasks. So in business, for example, one of the things that I like to do is, and I've trained myself, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about business, is because I've trained myself to enjoy every aspect of it. I enjoy sales, marketing, finance, budgeting, administration, every aspect. Every aspect I enjoy doing. This doesn't mean that I do everything. That's not what it means. It means I enjoy doing it because I recognize that maybe at some point I might have to do those things. And that if I have to do those things, I can create flow in those things, and I can actually have a happy, productive day. And I can make every day happy and productive. And I can enjoy what I do so much and every aspect of it so much that it doesn't seem like work. It just seems like enjoyment. To overcome the anxieties and depressions of contemporary life, individuals must become independent of society, of social environments to a degree that they no longer respond exclusively in terms of its rewards and punishments. To achieve such autonomy, a person has to learn to provide rewards to herself. She has to develop the ability to find enjoyment and purpose regardless of external circumstances. So while we're trying to achieve results, we have to recognize that we can't base it on condition. Most of our time is going to be spent doing and taking action and working towards a goal, especially if it's a high-level goal. And if we only look for validation and happiness when we get the result or some level of result to the result, then we're not going to enjoy ourselves doing what we're having to do to get there. And we're most likely going to give up. Why? Because we make the happiness dependent on the outcome rather than the process. This is not to say that you shouldn't value the outcome. In flow, you value both. You value the moment and you value the outcome. Now, you can recognize in yourself if you're off balance. Ask yourself, do you value the outcome more or do you value the process more? Well, I think it's important to value both because you're motivated by your goals. So you know what you want. And at the same time, you're motivated by doing. You enjoy doing it. And you recognize that there's going to be ups and downs. Sometimes you'll make a lot of progress. Sometimes it's going to seem like you take steps back. But when you enjoy the process, you're not going to be hard on yourself. And you're going to stay the course. And you're going to do it because you love to do it. And the statistical probability of you getting the results is going to be way higher. So you have to learn how to create rewards for yourself. You can create rewards that are micro rewards. you can turn the tasks that you do into little games. One of the things that I like to do is I track my time. And I use Pomodoros, 25-minute work chunks. And one of the games I create is focus on this really what would seem like a boring task for 25 minutes and create enjoyment. See if I can enjoy this task, actually manufacture that enjoyment while I'm doing that task. And that stimulates my mind, gets me really excited. It takes work, it takes focus, but it's going to place me into flow state, because now, and one of the elements of flow state, we'll talk about this later, is where challenge meets skill. The challenge has now become to enjoy this task. Whereas the task might be brain dead. It could just be like, a repetitive task. But now I'm turning it into a game. So what am I doing? I'm creating rewards. I'm creating a game. And I know that if I can last 25 minutes of doing this, what on the surface might seem like a boring task, and transform it into a fun task by playing a game with it, then I win. And my reward is a higher level of self-esteem. I can now do something that most people can't. And if you want to get high levels of results, you're probably going to have to learn how to do things that most people cannot do. Why? Because of saturation. Skills, there's a lot of different people who have different skills, but what we value is a higher level of the skill or new skills. Why? Because that's what moves civilization forward. You're essentially developing a very profound skill, a skill that even people who have a lot of, skills that they dedicate by going through school for a long time or dedicating a lot of time in their craft, hands-on experience doing, don't have, which is the ability to learn how to enjoy the process. That's one of the rare skills of today's world. The ability to enjoy even the most mundane, boring, repetitive tasks. If you can develop that skill, and you can develop that skill, it takes some practice, some focus, some discipline, and you can enjoy the process of doing it, you are going to accelerate further. A lot of things, like for example in business, is the day-to-day grind. It's the repetitive things you do over and over again. Very rarely do you make the very fancy, glamorous moves. Most of your time is spent doing repetitive things. And if you don't find enjoyment in that, then you're probably not going to last. And those that do last to get to a high level of success are doing this thing unconsciously. If they are not, and they force themselves through, well, then they arrive to the destination stressed out. So you got to ask yourself, what way do you want to get there? Do you want to get there where you can look back on the journey and say, that was an amazing journey. It's a fun journey, so amazing that I want to start another similar one. Or do you want to look back and say, yeah, that was so stressful. I never want to do that again, but I'm here now. Who do you think will more likely have their mental, physical health when they get there? We have a choice. We grew up believing that what counts most in our lives is that which will occur in the future. Parents teach children that if they learn good habits now, they will be better off as adults. Teachers assure pupils that by boring classes will benefit them later, when the students are going to be looking for jobs. So, again, we're trained to look for the reward somewhere down the line, in the future, or outside of the now. That's not the optimal way to be. The optimal way to be is to understand the reward exists right now in front of you. The most important person in your life is the person you're talking to right now. I'm not saying this from a place of arrogance, but this should be true for anyone that you talk to. The most important thing that you're doing is the thing you're doing right now. The most important thing you're going to be doing an hour from right now is the thing you're going to be doing an hour from now. If you don't see it as important, then why you're doing it? You've got to question yourself. You've got to take inventory. And if you know you have to do it, you might as well make it the most important thing. And your reward is there in that thing you're going to do. Or your reward really is the now, in this moment. Doing and practicing whatever you're doing with the most focused presence possible. Not thinking about where you should be, but observing yourself as you're communicating right now. This is one of the things that I've gotten better at. For example, as I make this video right now, and I've gotten better at this as I made my last 5 to 10 videos or 15 videos or whatever, is real time. I'm able to observe myself communicating while I'm communicating. I'm able to observe the fluctuation in my tonality. I'm able to observe how clear and concise or lack thereof I'm being, how on point I'm being or lack thereof. I'm able to do this because I've trained myself and I'm getting better at it. And you can do it also, especially knowing that I come from a background where I was very distracted and all over the place. I could no way see myself being present and aware to my communication, voice, tonality, and words I'm saying, that to the level that I'm at right now. I would nowhere see myself being this way. And I also recognize that I have far more improvement to make. I can value everything that I do even more, and I've been on this journey, and that's why I'm making this video for you to recognize that from morning till night, value each moment, find the happiness in each moment, and you will enjoy doing the things you know you have to do to get the results you want. The results will be accelerated and to an even higher level, most likely, and you will enjoy the process. In a complex society, many powerful groups are involved in socializing, sometimes to seemingly contradictory goals. On the one hand, official instructions like schools, churches, and banks try to turn us into responsible citizens willing to work hard and save. On the other hand, we're constantly cajoled by merchants, manufacturers, and advertisers who spend our earnings on products that will produce them more profit for them, produce most profits for them. And advertisers to spend our earnings on products that will produce more profits for them. And finally, the underground system of forbidden pleasures run by gamblers, pimps, and drug dealers, which is dialectically linked to the official institution's promises its own rewards of easy dissipation, provided we pay. The messages are very different, but their outcome is essentially the same. They make us dependent on a social system that exploits our energies for its own purpose. This is not to say that the system is evil and it's sinister. This is to say that this is the reality of the game or how the world works. And you have a choice. Do you want to be the kind of person that is exploited based on the promise of pleasure or quick pleasure as a result of your hard-earned money, your hard-earned energy? Or do you want to be the person that recognizes that you can experience happiness that is far more gratifying and fulfilling in this moment and with the things that you do? And while you reach out to higher levels and maybe want to experience a very nice vacation and things like that, it's done from a more conscious level. You're more conscious and aware, and you're not doing it from a place where you have been manipulated to go down that path. You can get better at this. Enjoyment is characterized by this forward movement, by a sense of novelty, of accomplishment. Playing a close game of tennis that stretches one's abilities is enjoyable, as is reading a book that reveals things in a new light, as is having a conversation that leads to express ideas we didn't know we had. Closing a contested business deal or any piece of work well done is enjoyable. None of these experiences may be particularly pleasurable at the time they are taking place, but afterwards we think back on them and say, that was really fun, and wish they would happen again. After an enjoyable event, we know that we have changed and that our self has grown. In some respect, we've become more complex as a result of it. So flow essentially gets us to become more complex as beings, and complex not in a negative way, but in a way we're able to handle more complexity, in the sense that whatever it is that we're doing as far as our craft, let's use flow as, for example, in work. If you invest a lot of time every day in flow state and you are going at it, with the depth, and you're enjoying what you do, you're actually learning a lot real time. And as a result, you're growing. And at the end of the day, you're going to see how much you've grown, and your performance is going to increase. And the more your performance increase, the more is returned back to you as far as money or whatever else as far as value. The mark of a person is in control of consciousness is the ability, the mark of a person who is in control of consciousness is the ability to focus attention at will, to be oblivious to distractions, to concentrate for as long as it takes to achieve a goal, but not longer. And the person who can do this usually enjoys the normal course of everyday life. So usually what you'll find is someone who's very frenetic and energy's bouncing all over the place. They're not really present. They don't have a lot of control. And it doesn't necessarily mean that someone who's like very present and just kind of very chilled is not doing everything, doing a lot of things in their life. We seem to confuse the two. A lot of times we think when someone is, very busy and they seem really intense, that they're actually more successful and more accomplished. The reality is that they're living their life probably like that most of the time, and they're very stressed out, and they're probably a few conversations away from, losing their cool, or a life situation, even a small one, away from totally getting frustrated and breaking down, having a nervous breakdown, etc. So the ability really on getting to a high level of focus and awareness is developed through recognition of what are distractions, what are essentially signal in your environment, and what is noise, and practicing concentration. Now, there's different ways to practice concentration. The best way, obviously, is to concentrate while you're doing things. Break things down into smaller chunks, 25-minute chunks. For example, Pomodoro method, 50-minute chunks, 10-minute chunks, where you focus on only one thing at a time. This develops your concentration. The next thing to do is meditation. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be traditional meditation. It could be active meditation like running, where you have to focus, or even exercise, where you have to focus on getting through and being present to the moment. And even socializing can help you with this for extended periods of time to keep you at a high level of concentration for an extended period of time, essentially training it. Following a flow experience, the organization of the self is more complex than it used to be before. It is by becoming increasingly complex that the self-image is said to grow. Complexity is the result of two broad psychological processes: differentiation and integration. Differentiation implies a movement towards uniqueness, towards separating oneself from other. Integration refers to its opposite, a union with other people, with ideas and entities beyond the self. A complex self is one that succeeds in combining these both tendencies. Now, why am I investing a lot of time? I can easily jump into the elements of flow, and we can talk about the actual flow process, but why am I investing a lot of time in this? Is because you have to understand that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And thus, you have to recognize that flow, as simple as the concept and the process as it might seem, is actually quite hard to achieve if you haven't fundamentally understood the concepts that are covered prior. Okay? If you understand it, you internalize it, then you're able to recreate flow easily. Now that I've gone through the book and I've been practicing it over the last few weeks, and actually months, because I've been talking about flow and thinking about flow and working with flow for a long time in many different areas. It's only until like this last week that I've really gone deep dive into studying this book. I recognize that as simplistic as it is, there are a lot of things that prevent us from getting into flow and maintaining flow. And one of the things is the inability to accept two polarizing thoughts in the mind. A lot of people either want to accept one way or the other way. They fail to understand nuance or complexity and variations between the polarities. So for example, in this case right here, they're talking about differentiation and integration. Okay, so when you experience flow, it's a combination of being about the self and selfless. We'll talk about this later, but essentially, differentiation means that the more you find yourself in flow and the more you develop your abilities, the more you differentiate yourself in the marketplace, in that particular experience. In, let's say, if you play a sport, the more you differentiate yourself as a player, as a more unique player with unique abilities. However, the greater you're able to integrate with the team for the objective outcome or to society. If you're too one-sided, if you're way on the differentiation side, you will not connect and collaborate with others. You simply won't understand how to see it from the perspective of others. You won't have really good communication skills. You won't be able to create real value into the marketplace, for example, in business, by isolating yourself excessively. Now, on the flip side, integration. If you're too much about the other people, then you're kind of just trying to blend in and just, merge in the background of society. You're not really being unique. You don't offer unique perspective, unique insights, unique skills, unique value. However, when practicing flow, you actually develop both. You actually develop and appreciate both. But prior to consciously putting yourself in flow state, learn how to develop the ability to appreciate both the differentiation and integration, to accept different polarities. And, in spiritual concepts, for example, they talk about left and right and polarities. Just polarities exist in everything: North Pole, South Pole, feminine aspects, masculine aspects, people that are politically left, people that are politically right, people that are all about, making money versus people that are all about doing social good. If you want a high level and you want to be able to experience flow and you want to be happy with what you do, you have to understand the balance between polarities and how they come into play. This doesn't mean that it's exactly in the middle. It's variation. But you got to be able to understand and accept both perspectives, different sides of the coin, and understand that even if things are not necessarily the way you think they should be, that there is some kind of divine order in place, and that you're not going to let something that is not what you agree with throw you off and piss you off, but rather you're going to do the best you can with what you have and the understandings you have right now to move forward, knowing that while you do that, you're going to be able to automatically integrate and balance really well. You see, in this world, it's easy to just be one-sided, very easy. It's harder to be integral, to look at different concepts and say, how does this fit into what I'm trying to do right now, into my goals, into the goals of creating value for others? It is more of a meditative experience than a discussion. It's something that you feel. Could also be referred to as Fingerspitzengefühl from 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Changing external conditions might seem to work at first, but if a person is not in control of his consciousness, the old fears and desires will soon return, reviving anxiety. So what this means is, in the context of day-to-day life, what you resist persists. When you let go of things, you have to be able to let go from a perspective of grace and finesse and understanding that it no longer fits into your model or into your objective in hand, gracefully. If you forcefully try to resist something, you put up walls and you block it off aggressively, then you haven't really peacefully let go of that thing. And you're just trying to change your environment without actually changing yourself within. What will happen is you will see that thing again. Okay, you can isolate yourself all you want, but you will see that demon, that shadow, that fear, that insecurity, even in your meditation, even in your sleep. I'm not trying to sound scary or anything like that, but that's the reality of the situation, is that we're constantly projecting into our reality our internal state. And if our internal state is not clear and organized, we're going to project that into our external. And as much as you try to change the external through some tactics, it might temporarily band-aid the solution, but it will come back again. So, that being said, how do you transform? Well, one of the best ways to transform is gratitude and appreciation. And we do that specifically through being happy with what we're doing right now. The reason why is because by being happy with what they're doing right now is we're gracefully letting go flow is about gracefulness. If you force yourself into flow, you're not going to get into flow. If you are not attached, but at the same time very specific on where you're going, well, now you're going to get into flow. Think of a surfer, for example. The surfer can't control the waves of the ocean. But when a surfer is really eloquent and really masterful in their skill, they make it look like they control the ocean. They make it look very beautiful and very graceful and very eloquent. They're working with it, but they're still getting what they want out of it. They're still able to surf and surf really well, but they're working with the environment. They're not fighting it. So look at your life and all the things you're doing and see where you are forcefully pushing things away. And understand that if you're doing that, it's going to come back in some shape or form. And the way to overcome that is to, with everything that you do, from morning till night, look for the happiness within the thing you're doing. Be fully engaged. Not only will you find yourself in flow, but you're actually practicing letting go gracefully. And those things will no longer be there anymore. So they talk about psychic energy. Okay, psychic energy. Essentially, where your attention goes is where energy flows. Right now in your reality, as you're watching this, whatever you're putting attention on, you might be fully being present to this video, or you could be multitasking. Wherever you put your attention, the energy is going to flow there. Life is going to exist where you put your attention. That being said, that's what they refer to as psychic energy. If you can't control where your attention goes, then you're not going to know how to truly enjoy. Why? Because in order to actually find enjoyment in the tasks that you do, which tap into flow state, you have to be present and aware enough to look for the areas of enjoyment in the thing you're doing, the nuances. You have to train yourself. If you're doing administrative work, it's not just administrative work. You got to look for the game in there, the deep meaning of the administrative work, how it's going to improve other areas of your life if you master completing it really well, how to turn it into an automated system that maybe you can get somebody to develop a software for. All that is discovered through deep reflection. When you read a book, are you reading it just for validating your own perspective? Or are you open and okay to have your perspective challenged? Can you handle having your perspective challenged? Even if it's something you don't necessarily believe in, you firmly don't believe it, are you okay with someone communicating to you about something that you radically don't believe in, but at the same time you're present and you're enjoying that moment with them? Can you do that? Well, you can practice that with everything that you do. That is conscious directing of psychic energy. That is going to put you in flow in conversation. That's going to open up the channel of communication between people. Let's say it was about communicating. That's going to be consciously exercising your attention and awareness to pick up on very deep understandings in what you're doing that other people won't be able to pick up on. You'd be able to pick up meanings from books that other people can't pick up on because they're not being as present and aware. It is in that nuanced information where you'll be able to create something profoundly different that other people can't create. And it's all there within your awareness right now. A person who is constantly worried about how others will perceive her, who is afraid of creating the wrong impression or of doing something inappropriate, is also condemned to permanent exclusion from enjoyment. So are people who are excessively self-centered. Self-centered individuals is usually not self-conscious, but instead evaluates every bit of information only in terms of how it relates to her desires. So again, polarity. The power of being able to hold two polarizing thoughts in your mind and being okay with it is going to allow you to tap into flow state a lot easier. You're going to see as we go through the process. So we talk about polarity a lot. And there's a difference, obviously, between being self-centered or constantly trying to make everyone else happy. However, both are important. But there's a balance. There's a balance, and the balance is not something you can really think about. You can't just be like, okay, now I'm being too self-centered, or now I'm being, you can kind of gauge yourself like that, but it's really in the being and really in the doing and being submerged in the moment where authentically the acceptance of letting go of what other people think of you, but at the same time really valuing yourself comes into play. Okay, very nuanced. You really have to think about that. However, more importantly than thinking about it, you've got to be following the process. So let's talk about the process here, the elements of flow. The first, and what I did is the book, it had the elements displayed a certain way, explained a certain way. Then I went out on the internet and I tried to see different perspectives on flow. So what I did was, through a combination of the book and what I gathered from others and my own personal experience, I created a variation, and I reworded it and so forth, and I reorganized it. Elements of flow. So this is what it is. So number one is clear-cut goals at an abstract and granular level. So in order to get into flow, you have to know what it is that you want. If you're playing a sport, you have to know that winning is the end result, or getting 3 goals, if you're a soccer player, in a game is the end result, or if you're surfing, to ride, to develop your skill and ride a certain size of the wave. Or in business, you want to make a certain amount of money at the end of the month, or you want to be able to put out a certain level of product or service, or you want to finish the website, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is. You have to know what it is. And not only an abstract level, as in completing it, but the granular steps. Let's take building a website. You can say, I want to build a website. Fine. That's an abstract level goal, and that's good. What are the granular steps of building the website? This is where you have to, again, it's polarity. You got to be able to think abstract and granular and the variations in between. Granular is, okay, first I've got to get the theme. If you're building a WordPress website, I got to learn and study what the marketplace is doing is another step. I've got to look at what are appropriate color schemes. I got to get my logo. I got to know what pages are appropriate for my audience. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Those are granular goals. And each one of those granular goals, you work on them separate. Each one of those granular goals are going to be opportunities to get into flow as you do it. Now, again, we're talking about websites here, but the same applies, for example, social skills. You got to look at what it is that you want. Do you want to network with people to advance your career? Okay, so that being said, what are the places that you can go network with people that will advance your career? What are the ways of approaching people at those events? And so forth. Now, you don't have to overthink this. This will become something that will become second nature if you just understand the concept of abstract, high-level goals and granular-level thinking and have an appreciation for the two polarities. But that's one of the important criteria. Let's dive a little deeper into this. When adversity threatens to paralyze us, we need to reassert control by finding a new direction in which to invest psychic energy. So in other words, the goal, both at the abstract and granular level, is where our attention is. It's where the energy flows. That's the psychic energy. A direction that lies outside the reach of external forces. When every aspiration is frustrated, a person must seek a meaningful goal around which to organize the self. So he talks about this in concentration camps. What they used to do in order to keep their sanity was they would create stories in their mind and create little games in their mind. And they would, I don't think this was in the concentration camp, but somewhere else in the book, they talked about someone who would actually play chess with themselves in the mind. Okay? By having this goal, they could occupy themselves. So for example, I talked about administration work in business. You can turn it into a game by trying to challenge yourself to find enjoyment in it, or you can have very specific outcomes that need to get done. Maybe you have to process 15 invoices in 25 minutes with a great level of focus and awareness so you don't, mess it up. those little things like that, those are the games, and those are the specific goals. Goals are not always obvious. You can create goals. You can make up goals. This is where you have to use your creativity. In social skills, for example, you can say that my goal today is to talk to 5 people. That's it. I'm just going to talk to 5 people. I'm just going to talk to 5 people, and I'm going to talk for 2 minutes each person. That would be an example. Make YouTube videos, you could say, I don't know exactly what my content is going to be about, but I'm just going to put out one video every week. And through that video, I'm going to observe the kind of responses I get, and then I'm going to figure out what kind of videos to make next. In business, you might say, I'm going to open up a clothing store, for example, and I'm going to get certain kinds of clothes that fit to a certain kind of audience and market and so forth. But as the store is open for weeks to come, my goal is to determine which ones sell the best. And then figure out from there, based on who buys the clothes, I'm going to ask them questions as to why they bought that, why they enjoyed it, what other things they would buy. And that could be a goal. If you immerse this is when we create goals, we're setting up goals that we find exciting and challenging that we want to immerse ourselves in. If one gets too complacent, feeling that psychic energy invested in new directions is wasted, unless there is a good chance of reaping extrinsic rewards for it, one may end up no longer enjoying life, and pleasures becomes the only source of positive experience. So this is very important because we're motivated by goals, and we're motivated by directing our psychic energy towards something. A lot of people who achieve a lot of financial success in business, they make a lot of money, for example, will find that once they hit certain levels of their financial goals, that they're no longer motivated by the money. It's just not there anymore. And they can try to push themselves and keep raising the bar, but it's harder. It gets harder and harder and harder. So the key to that is to be able to find other goals, other granular levels goals that contribute towards making that level of money. It could mean tapping into new markets. It could be spending more time with clients to figuring out what other kinds of offerings that you could offer them and how to do complex, not really necessarily super complex, but partnership deals and things like that. But they create new goals within their business that still meet the outcome. For example, exercise is a perfect example. Well, maybe the goal now is not to just build muscle and lose fat. Maybe you get to a certain point where you say, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to improve my ability to be more flexible. Or I'm going to improve my ability, my cardiovascular health. Or now that I'm at a certain level of fitness, I'm going to go and compete at a certain competition or something like that. Or I'm going to enter a certain kind of race or Ironman, triathlon, or something like that. We have to be constantly evaluating and seeing if what it is that was serving us as far as goals is no longer or is continuing to motivate us, and recreate what that motivation might be. The reason it is possible to achieve such complete involvement in a flow experience is that goals are usually clear and feedback immediate. So one of the important aspects is you'll find yourself, like programmers find themselves in flow state very easily because they can create something and they can run it and they can see if it worked or it didn't work or where it broke or etc. And then from there, what they could do is get feedback and go and adjust accordingly. One of the things that I find that helps me get into flow is actually paid advertising. Paid advertising. And literally what you could do is put out an ad and get immediate traffic sent to it. And it could either work or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, you can look at all the components as to see why it didn't work, because you got tracking code on each element and so forth. And then you're able to make decisions from that, and you can run it again and then get more feedback. And I find myself getting into flow when I'm doing that. I also find myself getting into flow when I create these mind maps. Why? Because when I read books, I'll pull out points, and I'll try to organize it. And then I'll have fun organizing it and readjusting it in a way that if I have to communicate it, it makes the most sense. And then I'll go out and look for more added information that's in the book. I might flip through the pages and pull out more granular information. I might go to websites, pull out more granular information, maybe some polarizing viewpoints, and then throw it on there. But the things that provide immediate feedback is in social situations is another example. When you communicate with somebody, you can get immediate feedback from the communication. If they resonated with you, they didn't resonate with you. That's why certain situations it's very easy to get into flow state. Sports, surfing, any type of activities that, like competitive activities of sports, very easy because you get immediate feedback and you can adjust accordingly real time based on your performance. Unless a person learns to set goals and to recognize and gauge feedback in such activities, she will not enjoy them. So if you don't know what you're doing it for, then you're probably not going to enjoy it because we're directed by our attention and awareness. Now, it might sound contradictory and it is polarizing to enjoy the moment. Well, that's why we have spent a lot of time in this video discussing the ability to hold two polarizing thoughts. You got to be okay with having a goal and then focusing on the moment, because the moment essentially gauges you towards your goal and you're going back and forth. You're litmus testing to see where you're at, but you're trying to stay and try to do as great of a job in the present moment without saying that I want to be where the goal is. In some creative activities where goals are not clearly set in advance, a person must develop a strong personal sense of what she intends to do. Okay, so what happens is a lot of times, not a lot of times, but you might find yourself in situations where there's no clear-cut goals. However, you have to have a strong confidence in that particular time to recognize that the outcome is going to be the completion of the project or whatever, and this end result is going to happen, even if there's no timelines, for example. So one of the things then that's a perfect example, timelines. Maybe you're working for a company and they give you a project and they don't give you some clear-cut timelines. So as a result of that, you're not able to be as specific as to how to segment your time and energy and so forth. Well, one of the things that you could do is, as you develop a strong personal sense, you create the timelines. You create the deadline. Don't wait for someone to give you the deadline. You create it. So that's the first part of it, element of flow. The next is there's an immediate reporting and feedback. When the information that keeps coming into our awareness is congruent with goals, psychic energy flows effortlessly. There is no need to worry, no reason to question one's adequacy. So I mentioned about reporting and, if possible, setting up real-time reporting in what you do, or being involved in situations where you can get real empirical data so you can make adjustments. And then from that data that you get, you make adjustments, and then you get more data, and so forth. However, the reporting and the adjustments that you get have to be congruent towards the goal. In other words, your thoughts, your actions, your words must be congruent towards your vision. You hear this said a lot. Based on the feedback that you get, you have to adjust towards the goal. This might seem very obvious, but yet a lot of people don't do this because they get distracted. They might consume other information that pulls them in a different direction. So for example, let's say you're trading and you've got a very clear-cut strategy on how you trade. You execute upon your trades, you win some, you lose some, but overall, you're making progress. Well, now all of a sudden you get this tactic or strategy that somebody tells you, or you get very emotional when something happens in the marketplace. And then what happens is you change your strategy around. But you didn't change it based on the feedback that you got from the actions that you took or the reporting from the marketplace. You changed it based on something else that is an alternative strategy, and it's not very clear-cut. Well, what happens now is you've distorted yourself. You've broken your flow. And if things don't work out because you've now taken that alternative route, you're going to be upset. And then if you don't recognize that the reason why is you deviated from your strategy, you're going to be confused. What could be worse is, let's say you deviated from your strategy and you actually performed as a result of it. Now failing to recognize and restructure as to why it happened and have proper reporting in place to recognize that this might be a lucky chance or lucky action or something like that. You marry that strategy, and then now all of a sudden after that it doesn't work out anymore. Now you're even further off. So there really is a balance between, again, two polarizing thoughts of knowing exactly what you want and knowing when to adjust. And if you can go by the reporting and the data that's captured based on the actions you take, and we're talking about business stuff, but the same thing applies when you're playing sports. You're out on the field, you make your moves, and you find that one player is stronger in one area than the other player. And you're constantly, not being able to overcome that area. Well, now that you got that data and you know that it's consistent, you can adjust your strategy so you can work around that player. That's different than not trying to pay attention to the data at hand and just come up with theories and just allow other people talk you into things. Now, one of the things that I find in just life in general, but we'll talk about business because it's an area I'm really passionate about, is to look for feedback as much as you can from the marketplace and the initiatives at hand that you execute upon, rather than talking to people about it. Most people will only give you their opinion if they're not very savvy on the very specific business strategy. Then most likely the information they give you is not valid. And if you're easily swayed by someone else's opinion, it's going to distort your ability to execute. That's why it's always best, if you can, to just go at it. Just work at it. Be in flow. Get the reporting from your execution and keep modifying it until, if and when you hit a roadblock where you just don't know how to get any further. But don't ask for advice prematurely, unnecessarily, just because you want to talk about what you're doing. That's a trap. The key to being in flow is taking action. Next, there is a balance between challenge and skill. So essentially, flow is experienced when we have a certain level of skill, but the thing that we're doing is challenging enough that it keeps us engaged. If things are too easy and we've got too much skill, we're just going to get bored and we don't experience flow. If things are too challenging, we're not overwhelmed. We end up being overwhelmed. So when we're looking to connect with flow and maintain flow, we're looking for ideally where challenge meets skill, where something is challenging yet not overwhelming. A lot of times, and we'll use business as an example, as we look around when we see somebody making millions of dollars and they've got all these challenges, we try to do what they're doing. We don't have enough skill and we get overwhelmed and we get frustrated. The key is to chunk it down. Break the high-level business goal down into granular steps or granular goals or smaller chunked goals. And then determine if you have enough skill and there's enough challenge to overcome that and focus on that. That's why it's important to just be in competition with yourself. Competition with others can motivate you, but it should be based on your own self that you're competing with. For example, let's pull this quote up here. Competition is enjoyable only when it means to perfect one's skills. When it becomes an end in itself, it ceases to be fun. If you're constantly competing with others and you're constantly looking at what others are doing and you're trying to compete with them, chances are, if they're at a high level, you're not in flow because your skills are too low. However, if you're competing with yourself and you're gauging where your competitors are in the marketplace, and you're constantly making improvements, again, it's the ability to hold two polarizing thoughts in the mind. Well, now you're making progress. And you're using it to perfect and build your skills. And thus, you're finding happiness with it, because flow is where we experience happiness. An overwhelming proportion of optimal experiences are reported to occur when sequences of activities that are goal-directed and bounded by rules, activities that require the investment of psychic energy and that could not be done without the appropriate skill. So again, the overwhelming proportion of optimal experiences are, and we're talking about flow here, are reported to occur when sequences of activities and that are goal-directed. So you got to do things that are goal-directed. We have to know where we're going. And there's rules to get there, right? The rules essentially are the boundaries in the game, for example, or they are unspoken rules. But we kind of know where they are. So we know what we have to work with. Sometimes the rules are figured out with skill. Okay, for example, in business world, there's a lot of rules like political rules, for example, that you might not know unless you've been doing it for a while. But once you understand the rules and the political aspects, the laws of power, and all these different kinds of things, you're better equipped to go at it. And you're at a higher level of challenge. You're at a higher level of skill. And you found your level of abstraction to be in to experience flow. Part of this journey is to look and determine where challenge meets skills and understand where we got to play at. We want to be at that sweet spot. That's where we experience happiness. That's where we experience flow. Now, this doesn't mean that you never place yourself in a situation, because there's always exceptions to the rule, where it's like extremely challenging. Like the old saying, like throw somebody in the deep end, they'll learn how to swim faster. I think it's okay to do that once in a while, to just experience something that really shocks your senses and forces you to develop skills really fast. However, I also think that when we're talking about flow here, that we got to keep into consideration that there's a rule that says challenge meets skill to experience that. And if we're constantly putting ourselves in the deep end, it's going to be really hard to experience joy in what we're doing. So a diverse strategy is very important. One of the things that I like to do is place myself in really challenging situations once in a while, but try to spend as much time experiencing flow, which is also challenging. Okay, a lot of people spend their time in situations they don't experience flow, and thus they're not actually being optimal. They may be in the situation where stuff that they're doing is way too easy and they're not being challenged. They actually move backwards. Or they're trying to do things that is way too challenging for them, and they try to fake their way through it, and thus they're very frustrated and upset with themselves. And they may be thinking that they're putting themselves in the deep zone, but somebody who has a diverse view of combining being in flow a lot of times and once in a while throwing them in the deep end, what I found through my own experience is going to eventually accelerate past that person, because the other person who's constantly putting themselves in the deep end is probably just going to burn out. They're just constantly, overwhelming and stressing out their system, and they'll just burn out. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Okay, voluntary effort. Just hammering on these points here, because really what we're trying to do is, when challenge meets skill, we want to grow further. We want to increase our skills. So we're stretching ourselves. And you can feel, and this is harder to gauge in the beginning, but the more conscious and aware of being in flow you are, or the elements that get you in flow for the specific thing that you're doing, the more you can gauge yourself and say, okay, well, now I'm going to stretch myself a little bit more. I'm going to try to do something a little bit more challenging. Now, when you're doing this, it's a very self-reflected thing. Okay, try not to go out and ask for opinions unless you're dealing with someone who's got real mastery in whatever it is that you're doing, because most of the time people are either going to tell you to raise the bar too high or lower it, and they're not going to keep you in flow, because they don't know what it's like to be you. And it really takes somebody who's just an amazing master and modeler of that ability, and a great teacher, to understand how to keep you in flow. And those are professional coaches usually. Next, action and awareness becomes one. Act with a deep but effortless involvement that removes from awareness the worries and frustrations of everyday life. So constantly we're being bombarded with stimulus that stresses us out, that makes us look at our situations in life and say, oh, we're not adequate, or our life is not as good as compared to this other person, or things are hard and whatever else. When we're in flow, we're moving forward. We're building up our skills. We're being happy. We're enjoying what we do. We're being productive. We're not burning mental resources, emotional resources, inefficient. And when you're in flow, there's no time to think about stuff that doesn't matter. Okay, and when it says acts with deep but effortless involvement, effortless is very nuanced. When we're talking about challenge and skill, the ability to overcome the situation flows out of you. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't. And maybe you get yourself out of flow, you'll lose flow, but you can get yourself back into it. And when you're in flow, your abilities and the challenges, they match really well. And then what happens is it seems like effortless, as in you're not trying very hard to get the best skills out of you. They're just They're coming out of you and they're getting built as they come out of you. And while you're doing that, because it's highly engaged, highly focused, you don't pay attention to things that are happening in the world that don't matter outside of that moment. And all these things that frustrate you, like the news and just a whole bunch of things that may be frustrating you, they're not important in that moment. What matters is that you're putting out your best in that moment. You're contributing your best. When all of people's relevant skills are needed to cope with the challenges of a situation, that person's attention is completely absorbed in the activity. There is no excess psychic energy left over to process any information by what that activity offers. All the attention is concentrated on the relevant stimuli. As a result, one of the most universal and distinctive features of optimal experience takes place. People become so involved in what they're doing that the activity becomes spontaneous, almost automatic. They stop being aware of themselves and separate from their actions that they are performing. It's a very powerful place to be. You are not identified. You don't have an identity. You're just being in that moment. And you're being from a place of contribution, from a place of creation. Okay? In flow, you're doing things. You're taking action. You're producing, whether it's art, whether it's business results, whether it's whatever it is you're producing. And you're in a very sweet spot where you're producing, but you also let go. You're not trying too hard. You can tell somebody when somebody's really good at what they do on how eloquently they do it. And while at times it might look like they're trying hard, those that are very good at it will appear to be eloquent most of the time. And what they do will seem very artful. Now, it's important to understand that we can all get like that with the things that we do by building ourselves up to that level by being in flow as much as possible. And the more you are in flow, the more you will level up your skill and the more challenges you will face. And eventually you'll get to the point that it takes such a refined eye to be able to see your flaws. All others will see is perfection because they don't have the refined capability to see the slight nuance of further development required for that skill. A lot of times we'll look at professional singers or musicians and, we'll just appreciate the beauty of what it is that they create. We won't be able to see flaws in them, because we're caught up with just how exciting their masterpiece is. And it's only the most refined, coach or somebody that is a trainer or someone that can help them make even the most granular improvements to get into a higher level. But, to get to that point, we can get there with our craft, with what it is that we do. A really good movie to watch is Hiro Dreams of Sushi. I'm really fascinated by that movie because I believe that he really is in flow most of the time. I actually believe that he's in flow pretty much all day before he makes the sushi, when he gets home. He's constantly focusing and refining and building his craft. I'm very much inspired by it. Now that you've watched this video, and hopefully you'll get and read the book, but watch this video a couple times to really internalize it and then observe flow. And then you'll start to appreciate that movie even more. Next, distractions are excluded from consciousness. Unless a person knows how to give order to his thoughts, attention will be attracted to whatever is most problematic at the moment. It will focus on some real or imaginary pain or recent grudges or long-term frustrations. Entropy is the normal state of consciousness, a condition that is neither useful nor enjoyable. So those of you that know me and have watched some of my earlier videos know that would be considered a very extreme minimalist, and I own very little possessions, and I tend to focus primarily on my business and my craft and the things that I do. Why? Because I enjoy it. So thus I find myself in flow a lot. But one of the things that I've noticed is when you're very minimal, physically, mentally, emotionally minimal, is that you're more likely to get distracted if you're not consciously in control of your mind. Because now that you don't have all these things taking up your mind, the mind tends to divert to negativity. And, this might be a biological thing. We want to try to make sure we're not in danger and so forth. I don't know. But I do know that happens. So I have to consciously make sure that I'm feeding myself with good information, good nutrients, not just for my mind, but for my soul and emotions. And I got to be around people that are uplifting and so forth, because it's very easy for my mind to go down a negative pathway. And when it does, it can keep spiraling and so forth. And then it'll set me back. So that's why I'm really passionate about flow. And that's why I'm discussing this very lengthy, because I really want to not only communicate this to you because I found this to be really beneficial, but I'm also reviewing my notes, and I watch my own videos to internalize the concepts deeper, to remind me that if I keep myself in flow for the majority of the day, I'm less likely to be distracted by information that I don't need into my awareness that is going to derail me from producing the best that I can produce. So when you're in flow, distractions are excluded from consciousness. We're not fighting it. We're not saying go away distraction, go away, forcing things. We're not doing that. It's automatic. It's automatic because our attention and our awareness is on the thing that we're doing in hand, and we're enjoying it. There's a balance. We're challenged by it. At the same time, we've got the skills to do it to some degree. And, we get immediate reporting and we know where we're going. So we don't have any other room for distractions or anything to get into our awareness. Now, why is this powerful? This is powerful because then those resources can be challenged to figuring things out even faster, to figuring out even more complex problems. Fear of failure tapers away. I don't have any discussion points on this, but it's fear of failure, or fear is something that we experience when we have mental resources that are not being allocated for the objective at hand, essentially when we're not in flow. If we engage ourselves in what we do, we can't think about fear. And the more we can put ourselves in flow state, the less likely we are to fear. And I know this from a personal experience. And the less attention and energy we give to fear, the less power it has on us. The more getting into flow and maintaining it becomes a default state. The bolder you get, the clearer you get in your actions and your communication, the quicker you move towards your results. Self-consciousness disappears. So it's interesting because, doing the thing and getting yourself in flow can be a very seemingly self-centered thing, but it's actually not. It's by being in the moment and going into the space where you actually let go of yourself. Polarizing two thoughts, as I mentioned. In flow, a person is challenged to do her best and must certainly improve her skills. And at the same time, she doesn't have the opportunity to reflect on what this means in terms of self. If she did allow herself to become self-conscious, the experience would not have been very deep. Okay, so when you're self-conscious, what happens is that you try to judge yourself on how you look or how you appear to others or a self-construct of your past or who you want to be in the future. You're not in the moment. You actually become about the collaborative, the group. The thing that you're doing is from a place of contribution. It's either contributing towards raising up the standards for humanity, providing art or some form of creation, some form of value. It is uplifting your spirit, which will then uplift others. It's doing something that is very selfless. It might appear to people that don't understand how this works as self-centered, but it's actually not. Concern for the self disappears, yet paradoxically, the sense of self emerges stronger after the flow experience is over. Why? The best way to build confidence, really the only way to build confidence, is to see new abilities in yourself, to actually see yourself perform like you've never done before, to actually realize that you are capable of doing it. Well, you experience that more when you are in flow. You tap into abilities that you never thought were possible. And then it's from that place that afterwards you look back on and reflect upon it and you say, wow, I really am at this higher level. And then you will less likely be looking for approval and validation from others because you have it from within. You know how to create it from within. If you want validation, you create it from within by experiencing flow. Because after that flow experience, you'll see what you're capable of. Distortion of time. One of the most common descriptions for optimal performance is that time no longer seems to pass the way it ordinarily does. The objective external duration we measure with reference to outside events like night and day, or the orderly progression of clocks, is rendered irrelevant by the rhythms dictated by the activity. Often hours seem to pass by in minutes. In general, most people report that time seems to pass much faster. But occasionally the reverse occurs. Ballet dancers describe how a difficult turn that takes less than a second in real time stretches out for what seems like minutes. So you know you're in flow when you don't really care about time. You're not looking at the clock. You're involved with what you're doing. And because you're so involved with what you're doing, you don't have distraction and distortion. There's no sense of self, because time really is identified very strongly with sense of self. If you think about it, okay? We feel we don't have enough time. We're too old. We're too young. All these different kinds of things are associated with time, and thus they limit us. And when the time gets distorted automatically through flow state, we forget about that. And we're so caught up in the goal and the abstract levels of goal and the reporting we get, the feedback real time, from the moves of the ocean, for example, if you're a surfer, if you're a skateboarder, the wind, the elements on the ground, and whatever else. And the challenges that you face are stimulating you, and your skills come out. Your actions and your awareness becomes one. You're caught up in what you're doing, and there's no distractions. You're only focused on what it is happening in the moment. No fear of failure, and your self-consciousness disappears. And as a result of that, time doesn't even matter. And finally, the activity and the person becomes autotelic. The term autotelic derives from two Greek words, meaning auto meaning self and telos meaning goal. It refers to a self-contained activity, one that is done not with the expectation of some future benefit, but simply because the doing itself is the reward. It is one, okay? Self and the goal is one. Sounds like a very, Zen concept and so forth, but it is. It really is the best way to be. To be a balance between goal, which is a polarizing thought, compared to being in the moment. A lot of people have a hard time between understanding how to be goal-oriented and being in the now. They tend to have a bias, one towards the other, or one versus the other. They either are goal-oriented and they only care about the future and their goals, disregarding where it is in the now, or they're very much in the now. Personally, in my life, when I was growing up, I was more about the now. And then I became very goal-oriented. And I recognized that in earlier stages of my life, when I was all about the now, while I was enjoying everything I was doing, I wasn't really developing and pushing myself and growing and experiencing higher levels of success. But then when I became very goal-oriented, I started getting higher levels of results and success. I started hitting my goals, and I would just hit another goal after another goal after another goal. But then something devastating happened. I failed to value some of the things that I had in my life. And as a result, I lost them. And it was a very painful feeling. And it brought me to an interesting place. It made me realize that it's not about the being in the moment, just that. It's not about the goal. It's about both. It's actually harder to appreciate both. Way harder. Now, some of us, and we're allowed to live our lives whatever way we want. We can be goal-oriented and be okay with it. We can be all about the present and be okay with it. But I've chosen, and I recognize most of you that watch my videos have chosen also, just from the feedback that I get, to have a balance of both. And that's what this term means. It's about being goal-oriented and appreciating and understanding the reward is right now. And while you get to your goals, the goals are as equally as important as the moments that you invest in achieving them. An autotelic person needs few material possessions and little entertainment, comfort, power, or fame, because so much of what he or she does is already rewarding. Because such persons experience work flow in work, in family life, when interacting with people, when eating, even when alone, with nothing to do, they are less dependent on the external rewards that keep others motivated to go on with the life composed of routines. They are more autonomous and independent because they cannot be as easily manipulated with the threats or rewards from the outside. At the same time, they are more involved with everything around them because they are fully immersed in the current life. The key element of an optimal experience is that it is an end in itself. Even if initially undertaken for other reasons, the activity that consumes us becomes intrinsically rewarding. The autotelic experience, or flow, lifts the course of life to a different level. Alienation gives way to involvement. Enjoyment replaces boredom. Helplessness turns into a feeling of control. The psychic energy works to reinforce the sense of self instead of being lost in the service of external goals. When experience is extrinsically rewarding, life is justified in the present instead of being held hostage to a hypothetical future gain. So once you've become an autotelic person, you are essentially living in the flow. You are being in the flow. The trait and the mark of an autotelic personality are more clearly revealed by people who seem to enjoy situations that ordinary people would find unbearable. What you'll find is that people who achieve a high level of success usually come from backgrounds where they experience a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of turmoil. It is in those moments where they discovered flow. And maybe some of you are watching this right now and recognizing that you didn't have a name for it. And now you've got a process for it. And that's a very good thing. I personally, from my background, had a lot of really harsh experiences as a child. It was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. But I don't regret it. Why? Because I discovered flow. It's because of those situations that I was able to overcome other situations in life where a lot of people would have given up. So if you've gone through hardship and you're able to find flow in those hardships, or if you're going through hardship right now, then find flow in those hardships, because you'll find it to be very rewarding and fulfilling. And it'll be a lesson that you cannot be taught in school. You cannot learn the lesson from even watching this video. This video merely offers some theory and some guidelines, but it doesn't really help you understand unless it's experienced. An acquaintance who worked in U.S. Air Force intelligence tells the story of a pilot who was imprisoned in North Vietnam for many years and lost 80 pounds and much of his health in a jungle camp. When he was released, one of the first things he asked was to play a game of golf. To the great astonishment of his fellow officers, he played a superb game, despite his emaciated condition. To their inquiries, he replied that every day of his imprisonment, he imagined himself playing 18 holes, carefully choosing his clubs and approach and systematically varying the course. This discipline not only helped preserve his sanity, but apparently also kept his physical skills well honed. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you want a copy of this mind map, it's in the link in the description. This has been a discussion about flow. I will talk to you soon. Take care.